And here it's their lives, their careers, the physicality, the mental stress, that this is an incredibly, these guys' heartbeats, as we mentioned in the movie, are 180 to 200 beats a minute.
I'm really excited to be speaking today with Paul Taublieb, the director of Pay Dirt, the story of Supercross, not the history of Supercross, the story of Supercross, as we're told. Paul, thank you so much for the time. I really do appreciate it.
No, thank you.
What drew you in? Because Supercross is one of these things that, I mean, it's mainstream, it's huge, but it's also not the same in some ways. How did you come involved in the film?
Well, I've made a lot of films in the action sports world, but one day someone invited me to go to a Supercross race. And I was down on the floor and I go, this is amazing. And I hadn't been a fan. I've been in the world of freestyle motocross, where the guys do tricks because I have background with the X Games and so on. But I had never seen this racing. And then as I looked at it, I go, nobody's ever told these stories. It's big, but it's insular. There had never been a movie like, there's lots of documentaries of the Patriots or the Cowboys or Drive to Survive and so on and so forth. But nothing had been done in this world that was not this sort of, there had been some cinematic things that were visual, but never about the people. And so that's why I had this idea of, I'm not here to do an archival Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica story. I want to capture the heart of the story. And that's what got me inspired.
You know what? I'm glad you said that, because that's one of the things I love about this film is it's really telling the stories of the drivers, of the riders, of you will, and letting them speak in their own voice. But what struck you most about these men that you spoke to?
What struck me most was the incredible dedication and commitment to the sport, and that it looks kind of easy. There's a motor,
Yeah.
there's a seat. How hard could this really be? And then when I realized these stakes are so high and drama is about what's at stake. And here it's their lives, their careers, the physicality, the mental stress, that this is an incredibly, these guys' heartbeats, as we mentioned in the movie, are 180 to 200 beats a minute for 22 minutes. Now, in boxing, you get a rest every 3 minutes. And even you can run around the ring. Football, they play for 5 seconds and then they take a break. These guys, and they're moving fast, and they're up in the air, and they're battling each other at the same time. So I said, wait a second, these are modern gladiators. And then when I learned, it was kind of like an exploration, how they got there as young kids to get to this professional level. And that it's an illusion that it looks easy. It's incredibly difficult. So the whole thing was intriguing. And then as I got more into it, the human stories, because originally I was going to do a linear story. There was kind of a way to do it where each era had a dominant guy and it felt like a sports story. But as I got into it, and I have to give a lot of credit to my executive producer and narrator, Josh Brolin, who, as I was feeling my way along in the project and struggling, to be honest, which is not atypical for a documentary, Josh said, look, man, don't make the movie that people think you're going to make. Don't make the movie that you think you should make or people expect. And he goes, you may fail. He didn't say it was going to work. He said, but make an honest movie that you want to make, and that's your best chance of success. And so I decided to roll the dice and go with this sort of this thematic, quasi-unlinear story, and it came together, I think.
It absolutely does. And I was going to ask you about him anyway, but since you brought him up, how did Josh get involved? Because as far as I've never heard him talk about the sport before, but he seems so passionate about this subject.
Well, it's funny because a number of years ago, I was working on a movie called Hawaiian, The Legend of Eddie Aikau on ESPN 30 for 30 about a Hawaiian big wave surfer. And we couldn't find an announcer, a voiceover guy. And I went surfing at my local beach, and there was Josh in the water. And we were surfing it, but I was too nervous to talk to him. So I mentioned to my partner, who's also my wife, Susan Cooper, boy, Josh would be perfect for this. Called up his agent. Agent said, no way. He doesn't do voiceovers. He hates his voice. So forget about it. But I go, no, he's the guy, because I saw him surfing and he could surf well. And so I have to give credit to my wife. She kept calling and calling. And eventually he said, okay, I'll reluctantly do it. I've turned down every voice piece of work I've ever been asked to do. I think I sound terrible. He did that one. We won an Emmy Award for it. And we've now done, this is our 5th movie together. And so it's become a kind of a creative collaboration, not on a day-to-day basis because he's obviously off doing a lot of stuff. And so he rides a motorcycle to this day. He's a big Harley guy. He grew up riding a dirt bike out on the ranch. He's a surfer. He did skateboarding. So he brings a real passion to this, and he does it only for the passion. I can certainly tell you it's not for the fame or the money.
I love to hear that because you can see just, or rather you can hear just with his voice that he's genuinely interested, genuinely cares about these riders as does the film. Um, and it's such an interesting take or way to show, just let them share. And we have these, like you said, these different people. We've got people like Rick Johnson and Jimmy Button. Am I saying, is it, yeah, Jimmy
Yeah.
Button?
Mm-hmm.
And they're sharing their stories before and after. And I would love to hear what you learned from them about how this experience has affected them, not just the ride, but the whole contribution to it.
What I learned from them was one thing that was interesting. Nobody's ever asked them before.
Mm,
This was kind of virgin territory as a filmmaker. As I said, it's not like there's been in-depth movies done about the sport. So these guys really wanted to tell their stories. Jimmy Button, in particular, he had never seen the footage of his crash. He had never wanted to see it. He didn't want to talk about it. He had struggled so much. And it was such a painful experience. Same with Ricky Johnson. I mean, this is a very, a universal story about a father-son relationship. And so it kind of poured out of these guys in a
mm,
way that they were surprised. And some of the people in the industry, I had one guy who's been in the sport for 40 years going, I have never seen emotion. Because
mm.
sports, it's a little bit under the radar as a sport. And so bringing in sort of mainstream documentary filmmaking techniques and skills and experience to a world that was new to it was exciting because people couldn't wait to talk.
And forgive me for how this was going to sound, but bear with me. A lot of people, I would say a lot in the mainstream, it's not always taken seriously as a sport. I absolutely, this film does. I'm not saying it isn't, but because of the nature of it, it isn't. But you see these people, these men putting their lives on the line for their passion, and they get to share that, and they get to tell the stories of, this is what life was like on the other side, and I think it really works. And of course, there's also a bit of a conversation about road to recovery.
Yep.
Which what did that what was I know that's Jimmy's foundation, if I'm
Yeah, Jimmy,
correct,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
what does that offer to these people, to these men?
Well, going back to what you were saying about, people didn't really appreciate the sport. It looks kind of easy when you watch it. You
Mm,
have a motor, you're sitting down. All you have to do is twist the throttle. How hard could this be? And so, and we're not really a dirt culture. It's
mm,
not intuitive to mainstream. And that's what I hope the movie helps expose is that this is really difficult. This is really dangerous. They make it look easy, but the mental and physical challenge. And in terms of Jimmy, he's really interesting because, as he says, he was kind of an asshole. He was a selfish athlete, focused on himself. He didn't have his relationships, developed with his wife at the time and then his family. And it took a tragedy to make him a better person. And it had such an impact on his life that he said, I need to share this and I want to create a foundation. Because when he was hurt, he was cast out of the sport. He was a
mm,
reminder that people didn't want to see of, and he said, I want to help the next athletes to come along because you know what? People get hurt in this sport a lot. You throw your leg over a dirt bike and you are taking a huge risk. And, you look at other sports like even MotoGP. Maybe you go 180 miles an hour, but when you fall, you can slide. When you're on a dirt bike and something goes wrong, you come to a sudden stop. And it's the stop that gets you. And
mm,
dirt may look soft or that, but it's like concrete. And so for Jimmy Button, it was, he also had never talked about it. Nobody asked
mm,
him about it. And that was typical. Same thing with Ricky Johnson. Here's a relationship with his father who was literally, as his wife says, an abusive guy who, was an alcoholic and the relationship fell apart. Yet he finds redemption. And that theme of father and son, and then bringing his father's ashes and going on this mission. And
yeah.
he meets the guy who literally prematurely ended his career. These are stories that I hope transcend sport. It's hard for me to to sing my own praises because it's the viewer who makes the judgment. I can only try to serve it up. But I do know the athletes and people in the sport go, this is great that someone's showing, because it's, also one thing it occurs to me, they look like little toys out there. They're colorful. Yes. They have helmets. The bikes are colorful. It just and they fall down. They get back up. It just doesn't seem that real, and they're bouncing around. But when you then realize the physicality, the danger, there's a technology side. There's the dirt, which we have a whole section about that. The kids, the Loretta Lynn section about the amateur championship shows you. I raised a professional athlete. My son became a soccer player. I thought I sacrificed. I had no idea. When you think about it, your kid can't just go pick up a motorcycle. You got to go spend $5,000 to buy him, and you got to get a mechanic, and you got to buy tires. The level of commitment, and really, what did I really learn? These athletes are on a level beyond what any other sport that I've come across. And I've been around a lot of sports.
Well, I'm glad you say that too, because I think this is a film that really grounds them as human people. Like now, of course, it's huge. There's theatricality, monster beverages are in it. Like, it's this big thing. But this is a film that says, okay, these are real people. Yeah. These are real people who are genuinely, all it takes, I think it says at the beginning of the film, is 80% guy, 20% bike. A flick of the wrist, a slight spasm, and they may not walk again. Like, this is a very intricate experience for them. And there's an honesty to this that I appreciate.
And of course, the thing is, once you throw your leg over the bike and you're out there, and that's how the film sort of culminates with Josh's voice saying, you're out there, and your honesty, the truth is revealed. And the guys who are the champions, like the Ricky Carmichaels, talking about what his mother did to drive him to that, it comes out on the dirt, and it's one man. And it is the man. It's not really the machine. And the other thing that's kind of fun about this movie is it begins with a murder, of all things. I mean, who would expect? It's a great story, and then structurally, it's kind of fun where it starts in the LA Coliseum and it ends with the future and Danger Boy Deegan with his father and Brian Deegan back in the Coliseum with the sport really having a bright future. So it has sort of a traditional structure, yet it's a little surprising, hopefully.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, because you're right. There is this other thing in the film with Mike Goodwin, and you have conversations with him, or you have, like, what were those conversations like, and how did that bring flavor to the story for you?
Well, the way the sport was created was he went to a race with his girlfriend to propose to her, and she goes, "I'll say yes, but don't ever bring me to one of these dusty tracks." And so the light bulb went off in his head, and he goes, "I'm going to bring this to stadiums." And that's how the sport was created, which really was a European sport that was an outgrowth of motorcycle racers in the army from World War II, who, raced around, and then it grew in Europe. So, he's in prison. Some people think he's guilty. Some people think he's not. And he's very talkative. We've gotten many phone calls from him. He likes to call us up. And he says, in prison, he's kind of got a little cachet because he's the guy who's created Supercross. And he's still fighting for his innocence. And I don't have an opinion. It's not my job to judge that. But he is in prison for a double homicide with no possibility of parole. And he wanted his story told, and he was, open about it. And we did get a lot of phone calls. They can get on the phone, but it would be funny. I'd be driving down the road on my way somewhere at work, and the phone would ring, my cell phone, and you have a call from the Raymond J. Trump facility. This call is recorded. And all of a sudden I'm talking to a guy in prison. And he wanted to share his story, and he's kind of hoping it gets back on the radar. And, he's got his own hopes how this may revive his case or this and that, which we are not involved with. That's not. And it was a bit of a thing of like, I don't want the tail to become the dog. This is not a murder unraveling story, but you can't tell the story of the guy. There's no doubt he kind of bullshitted his way a little bit. As he said, he told a few lies, raised a few money. And to his great surprise, he created the sport that we now know.
Yeah, it isn't a murder podcast, if you will. Like, this isn't a story, but it certainly is mixed in this fascinating blend. It really is something unique, and it is a lot of fun. It is it's a beautiful story, Paul. Thank you so much. I know we're out of time, but thank you so much for the chance to chat. I really do appreciate it, and I wish you best with the film and have a great day.
The only thing I would add is if you want to see the movie on the big screen, which is how you should see it,
Yes,
paydirtthemovie.com, click on screenings, and you can find a screening. And it looks great on the big screen, and the sport's never been seen that way. So hopefully people will go see it in the theaters.
absolutely. I hope so as well. There's something these racing scenes would do really well on a big screen for sure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
your
you.
kind words.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.